Hello all. Dinesh Khanna is a managing trustee of the Nazar Foundation and one of the co-founders of the Delhi Photo Festival. He was also a photography curator for the first two editions of the Serendipity Arts Festival. He is a director of the Dhrish Academy at Museo Camera and is also the visual consultant with Sahapedia, where he advises on the Sahapedia Frames grant for cultural photography. He has done so much in his photographic career that it'll take a whole another podcast to just talk about it. But as an example, his third book, which was commissioned by the Rashtrapati Bhawan and Sahapedia, is about all aspects of the life and duties of the oldest regiment of the Indian Army. It's called Right of the Line, the President's Bodyguard. Following the success of which, he was then commissioned to work on the book Life in Rashtrapati Bhavan, which is his fourth photo book and was published in 2016. I have particularly been fascinated with his series about the chopping board and the beauty of the chopped vegetables of his kitchen, which we do talk about in length. But on the whole, we sit here to talk about the role of photography in the 21st century and how it has been dealing with the superhighway that is social media and how the instant transmission of visuals has manipulated the world of photography. We also talk a little about the current state of art versus authority and if this battle is fundamentally perpetual. We later talk about the role of a father towards his children and its supervision on their individuality, and then a little about fatherhood in the context of India. The conversation, as you can see, branches off into several different topics, and one would expect no less from the monolith of experiences that is Dinesh. As a seeker and a learner myself, it was evident that Dinesh has some refined views on the workings of society, and I personally got to learn a lot from him. I will try to get him on the podcast again because we still have much ground to cover. But until then, I hope you guys enjoy this because you're listening to the PS podcast, and I'm your host, Chaitanya. Okay, so first of all, welcome to the PS podcast, Dinesh. I'm very thankful that you would take out your time to talk to me, and I'm hoping as I saw some of your interviews and some of your talks that you gave and you showcased your work, I was just blown away by the quality of photography that you have done. And it is not a joke because I too was a photography student, and so I sort of understand the plight of using film, the love also, but just the fact that how much hard work goes into it, and then the post processing is another task in itself, going to the location. And we'll come to all those questions, but thank you first of all for agreeing.
No, thank you, Chaitanya. Thank you for reaching out. And I must confess that I am one of the people who's been doing a lot of talks during this entire lockdown period
Uh-huh.
on various platforms. But in spite of that, this is the first time I'm doing a podcast. So I'm, you know, personally quite curious and fascinated by new technologies and new ways of communicating. So this is, something which, in a way, I'm grateful to you for having reached out so I can do something different.
I think you would be a better podcast host because the way you talk and the way I've seen you talk in your talks, you have a passion, just the way you describe even making food. I know you have a deep interest in the art of making food and displaying it, and just the way your emotional response towards them, it just sounds so fascinating to hear. So maybe you can also sometime think about hosting a podcast of your own because I'm sure you have a lot of memories to share.
Maybe you've set me off on yet another journey. And I shall, if I do that, I will make sure that I, acknowledge the fact that it was Chaitanya who showed me the light.
I'm happy. I
Yeah.
was. This reminds me of that. In one of your talk, you mentioned something about basuri walas. Yeah, you said that you find some people in your life and they are.
It's actually comes from something which Tarun Khiwal had talked about in one of his talks.
Okay.
Tarun Khiwal, as you might know,
Mm-hmm.
is a very famous fashion photographer, or I would say really more of a people photographer, and who happens to do fashion also. Uh, what's very good about Tarun, and which is what I admired about him, besides his photographic, skills and progress, is the fact that he is very deeply rooted in his Indianness,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not just in his visuality and his visual sense, but also in his thinking. And what he was talking about when this thing about the Bansuriwala came up is that, a lot of us, people of my generation, and of course, Tarun is about 10 years younger than me, but, he's also from the film era. At a time when there was no formal photography education available in India. So the main way to learn was to work as an apprentice with other senior photographers. And Tarun had worked with a number of photographers like Hardev Singh and Prabhupada Das Gupta, etc. And he was talking in that context, and he said, that what we have to realize is that the it's not necessary that God comes into a life or destiny comes into a life, good fortune comes into a life with the band baja.
Mm-hmm.
You never know when the Bansuriwala comes and in what form,
Mm-hmm.
right? So he meant that his mentors were like the Bansuriwala of course being Krishna in this case,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore God who has come to give him, something which is valuable. So I have thereafter been using that phrase or that turn of phrase really every time I talk about people who have inadvertently or consciously or in whichever way, but which I feel that they contributed a great deal to my life,
Mm-hmm.
whether professionally or aesthetically or in any such way. So that term Bansuriwala came from one of Tarun's talk and is something which I use now because I think it's just so evocative.
Mm,
It's
it
so
is.
Indian. It's so rooted in the way we think and the way we live.
Mm.
So that's why I find that very interesting, and I really look at that. It's almost like a title, but in a very friendly sort of way.
Mm, mm. I have very recently sort of refound or found for the first time my love for this country. So, as you said, anything that resonates in an Indian manner, of course, I try not to be very too passionate about it that I go blind with bias. But anything, I'm just, every aspect of this country is now impressing me day after day. So,
That's good. I love to hear that. Yeah, because I find that is something which, especially amongst our educated and urban class, it's seen more as a badge to talk down about a country and its way of life than to say, and for instance, I don't, agree with anyone who says I'm proud to be an Indian or I'm proud to be a Hindu or I'm proud to be a Muslim, because these are not things which you have achieved; these are things which you're born with.
true.
So acknowledge it, be aware of it, and be happy about it. So this thing of being proud of being an Indian, I think is a load of bullshit. Uh, but the awareness of where I am from, what my roots are, and if you look at human life, it is a continuum from the time you're born and how you're brought up, where you're brought up, by whom you're brought up. All those experiences and all those influences is what make you as a person. So if you're going to negate that or in any way shun that, you end up in a way, damaging yourself rather than anything else.
Yeah,
So, but if you acknowledge that and start cherishing it, then they become inspirations for you.
yeah, that's
And
true.
in a way, you as an individual become more complete. And then what you do with it is up to you. But
Yeah.
the sheer acknowledgement of it and awareness of it, where you come from, what your roots are, I feel is absolutely vital. Thereafter, the world is your playground. Yeah? Then do what you want,
True.
but don't negate or push away the fact where you come from.
Yeah, I think any sort of hardwired identity makes you sort of blind or biased. But as you
Yeah,
said that acknowledging it and understanding it also it also raises awareness in your mind about the potholes of that thing, you know.
absolutely.
So
Yeah,
it is not just to be proud of the country. If you're really proud of your country, you probably do something to improve it, because none of the countries are, even the Scandinavian ones, none of them are perfect as far as we can see. But yeah.
No country is perfect, no culture is perfect, no individual is perfect. But perfection, anyway, I think is a is a very unfortunate kind of a goal which people think is worth living for. I believe a great deal in imperfections. But imperfections is about being human, and it doesn't have to be imperfection. Does not mean there's something wrong or something evil or something missing. It's just that things are more organic, rather than absolutely mechanical.
Yeah, also, the thing that you said that no culture is perfect. One other thing that I find in that is also that people don't take the importance of time into that. A culture might have been perfect for the setting of a particular time, but if you try to reimpose the same thing now, and it goes for every culture. It goes for every culture. If I try to
True.
impose the culture of social media in 1950s, 1850s, it probably wouldn't work out the way it is doing right now. So I think
True.
I don't know how many of these things can a human keep in mind while thinking about these things, because identity is a very important part of our being, and we,
No, see, identity becomes is always an important part. All right. Now it's up to the individual to acknowledge it, understand it,
yeah.
learn from it, because only once you've gone through that process and you're an IIT, so I think you will understand what I'm saying. Will you be able to negate parts of it, say because I don't think this is something which I like or doesn't suit me in terms of what I want to do with my life? But if you don't go through that process and just blindly negate it because it's not cool
Yeah.
or because it's seen as medieval or it's not seen as something which is modern, then who's the loser?
Yeah.
I am the loser.
Correct. Okay, fine. So I was listening to your talk, and I found it very interesting that even your father was a photographer. Your mother also?
No, my mother wasn't. No.
Okay, so in one of the photos, she's holding a camera. So I think I suppose from that.
Well, I think she was. They were married just recently, and she obviously was a kind of a enthusiastic assistant for my father rather than the fact that she was a photographer herself.
Okay. So, have you ever pondered about photography when your father did it, photography when you did it or do it, and photography when your daughters might do it? You must have had that comparative thought. And it can be a comparison of anything. It could be about the technology or about the way the medium is treated. So, have you ever thought about that?
Uh, Actually, a fair amount, of course, not consistently, but sporadically. I would say it's more episodic rather than the fact that it's something which weighs me down in terms of thinking. Uh, about my father, one of the things I like to say is that, of course, yes, he was a photographer, uh, but he worked either in a studio or he worked with the American Embassy. And it was only once he retired from there that he was very excited about, doing freelance work and doing work which he wanted to do.
Okay.
But unfortunately, about a year and a half after he retired, he died in a car crash. So he wasn't really able to quite live up to that dream which he had.
Oh.
And that's something which I always felt bad about him having missed that opportunity. Because I think for any creative person, irrespective of what your art is, whether it's photography or dance or music, you don't have to be a professional, but you have to be able to engage with it in a way that is very deeply personal. Uh, and whether anyone else likes the output or not, as long as you are able to, live with it, explore it, and express with it, that's what is the most important. So that was something which is always there in my mind that I wish my father got a chance to do work with photography, which he loved as a medium. I know that for a fact, and be able to explore it for himself personally. And I think that to some extent probably, colored my thinking in terms of how I would want to approach my photography. Not entirely, but it was definitely one of the influences in terms of how I have engaged with photography over the last 30, 40 years. Uh, my daughters, my elder daughter Myra is not in the least bit interested in photography, though she's interested in images.
Okay.
My younger one has been, uh, and has a very good eye, if I may say so myself, but has chosen a path which is very different from photography. She's doing a master's in international security, and she's actually supposed to be in Paris at the moment, except because of the
Oh.
pandemic, she's kind of locked
Oh.
down right here. My elder daughter first became a diver, became a diving instructor, worked that way for 2 years, and is now for the last 2 years a yoga student and a teacher, and she lives in Mysore. And I must say, nothing thrills me more than the fact that both my daughters are doing things which both me and my wife have no clue what they are. Because I can't then dictate or influence them in terms of what they think about their chosen professions. And that is something which I think is very important for parents to be able to understand and let go of. Is to let your children, and please note, I'm not using the word allow because there's a word which a lot of parents use, that I allowed my children, because my contention for that always is, who are you to allow your children to do what with their lives? All right. Uh, but yes, Mahi, that's my younger one, she does use the visual medium, though recent times more video than stills, to record interesting things, to record interesting moments, to say, and that I think is, and we might talk about it later, is more because the visual is a language today, as much as Hindi and English and French and Spanish are. Uh, the current generation, or anyone who's living in today's world, uses the visual, whether still photography or the video, as a means of communication, as much as they use words in the spoken way. And Mahi, is very much into that. So that's something I find quite exciting. So if you see, there's been a progression or a change from my father to me and onwards to my daughters in terms of our engagement with the visual and our personal engagement. Because for me now, this coming back to how I find my journey having been a bit different from my dad's and from my daughter's, is that first I didn't want to be a photographer, even though I loved it and was introduced to it by my dad while I was young, because I didn't want to follow in his footpaths. I felt that in India, the caste system, makes sure that as a son, you have to follow your father's profession. If he's a businessman, you look after the business. If they have a factory, you run it for them, all that blah. So it's almost like a rebellion that I will not be a photographer because my dad is one, is the way I saw it in my early 20s, right? And which is why then I spent about almost a dozen years in advertising, and that also on the management client servicing side. But photography was something I loved, and I came back to it, in my early 30s and took it on professionally. So my initial year or two of being a professional photographer was to be an advertising photographer, simply because I was from the advertising business. And the main application I'd seen of photography was as visuals for advertising. But very soon I realized that for me, photography was not just a professional choice, it was also a personal communication point. That I wanted to use it to explore.
How did that change come about? This, how did you realize that?
Uh, Again, partly to do with advertising, partly to do with what we spoke about earlier. I feel that people like me, and I'm not going to include you, but uh, who are brought up in urban spaces in India, and I was brought up in Delhi, and I've worked in Delhi and Bombay in advertising, uh, are allowed by a country which is in that way very strangely liberal to live in our own bubbles.
Okay, okay.
And whereas I am, people like me are, and our lives are real, but this is not reflective of all of India. And I had, even in college and all, traveled a bit and knew that there were, many Indias which, coexisted in the rest of our country. And
Okay.
I was always very curious to see what are these Indians which are mine because they are part of my country, but which I don't belong to. All right. So I wanted to use photography as my means of exploring those Indias and expressing about them through my photographs. So that
Okay.
was my personal tryst with photography. And my professional, of course, is to do the kind of work which I'd seen being done because of my advertising background. And I take that also as a big challenge because I love working with people as a part of a team, working to a brief, producing pictures which have a particular objective. So that's the advertising and professional part, which is the way I've been doing my photography professionally for the last 30 odd years. But simultaneously and consistently along with that has been what I call my personal passion, which is photography for exploring my country, my people, my cultures, and whatever I see around me. Life, really, in general. So that's been my journey as opposed to the way my dad was, uh, and the way I see my daughter's engagement with photography or the visual world.
So you sort of started telling me about the time that you started in photography. But one question I always had, because my father was also a photographer, is also a photographer, and I never aimed to go into photography myself, but somehow I ended up in it. But that is a different story. And what did it mean? Because I was seeing your images you did for, I think, Tamil Nadu tourism, where
Yes.
yeah, you were going around Tamil Nadu. What did it mean to be on assignment in those days? I'm not talking about the professional aspect of it, but I also shot for Sahapedia, right?
Oh,
And
okay.
my
Yes, of
whereabouts,
course. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, my whereabouts were known to my family.
Mm-hmm.
I was somehow like sporadically updating Instagram as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure in your time, you have no way to communicate constantly to your
Not at
family.
all.
You know,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
when you're out, you're out.
Mm-hmm.
And the most important part is you don't know what you're shooting. The thing is that you cannot confirm what you're shooting once you've shot it. So
Yeah,
can you tell
yeah.
me what it meant to be on assignment at that time?
So first, let me tell you what it means to not know what you're shooting.
Okay.
You know, the Tamil Nadu tourism assignment was a 30-day long, 1 month long assignment where we had to go to. We were traveling right through the state and shooting all places of interest, archaeological and cultural and religious. And we were obviously shooting on film because this is in the early 90s.
Okay.
And what that meant was that you spend 30 days, and I think I forget how many dozen rolls of film I shot, without being able to see a single frame of what you'd shot. So that is the difference between film photography and digital. Digital, with every frame, you have the option of being able to see it instantly, even almost as you shoot. Whereas when we're doing assignments in the film era, till the assignment is over, and you had either come back from the studio or from wherever you've traveled and send the film to the lab, which then would take 2 days to process that film and then send it back to you. You didn't have a clue. And the only thing you could rely on is one, your expertise, and God knows, God, luck, whatever it is. But what that did was that it made you very cautious. It slowed you down. You thought and you engage with the entire process of engaging with light, engaging with composition, engaging with your subject, and engaging with the chemistry of photography to make sure that what you had photographed would be what you intended it to be. Because there was no visual evidence you could have till such time as the film was processed and sent back to you, which in cases like this kind of assignment, where you were out in the field for days or weeks together, it could mean that you've already been through that entire process before even seeing a single frame. So, if I may just carry on this point a little bit more, in essence, what happened was that you, while you were learning how to deal with film, okay, which is the chemistry of film, the physics of light, all right, the biology of people, and the maths of exposure.
Okay.
Okay, this is again is I am great at stealing people's ideas and using them in my own talks.
Okay.
This is another photographer who said that there was the PCBM of photography when the
Okay.
film era was there. So you had to
Okay.
understand these four things before you could say that you have mastered photography.
Yeah.
None of these, especially the chemistry part, is required anymore.
True.
Okay,
That's true.
and with film, there were no erasers. What you shot at that instant when you pressed the shutter got imprinted on the celluloid, and that was it. You didn't have any post processing, Lightroom, Photoshop, what have you, to correct things for you or erase things for you. So the discipline it brought to you, and it taught you to slow down. Is something which the promiscuity of digital, and I use the word very carefully, uh, is where it really differs from an earlier era and the current era. There's no price to pay with digital.
Yeah.
With film photography, every time you click the shutter, you spend money.
Yeah.
Because you spend money on the film, you spend money on the processing, and if you were shooting slide, which I was, for instance, you're spending money on getting it mounted and what have you.
Especially with the number of photographs that were available in one reel. We didn't even talk about that.
Absolutely, there's 36 in a roll. But
Yeah.
that you can say, okay, you could have any number of rolls, whatever it is, which your focus can't because it costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
With digital, once you bought a camera, conceptually, you don't have to spend any paisa more on photography because you can keep clicking and just looking at the photographs, and you don't need to make prints. You can just put them on your computer, take a look at them, share them on Instagram, share them on Facebook, make your website. It doesn't cost you anything. So that filter, in a way, has gone away because when there's a cost involved, there's a value involved too. So, which probably has led to this entire, tornado of photography and photographs today,
Yeah.
in which good photographs tend to get lost, rather than the other way around. It's so that's what I mean. So being on assignment, you were on edge in a positive sort of way because at any given time you were working with your accumulated knowledge, your accumulated experiences, and your accumulated skill to make sure that the photograph that you're taking, which you will not see right away, came out perfectly.
I think the fact that taking photos got incredibly cheaper and then it sort of fused with the ability to share it almost instantly. That has created this super highway of information and of course if there were less people sharing the work there was I don't know I might be wrong regarding it there was a chance of photographs being seen of people stopping and actually looking at a photograph and I'm sure that is the case.
See, there again, if I may explain that how
Yeah.
it's differed.
Yeah.
When one shot on film, because you couldn't see the image instantly because you had to process it, and then let's say if you were shooting color negative or black and white, you had to make a print. Now you couldn't make a print of everything which you shot because not all of it was perfectly exposed or perfectly composed,
Correct.
etc. So you had to
Correct.
first go through the process of finding the right pictures and
Correct.
making those prints. Now the print is a physical thing. Now you also must remember there was no internet at that time.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So the physical print, how many people could you show it to? A few
Yeah.
other photographer friends,
Yeah.
a few other friends, family members. Okay.
Yeah.
Firstly, to find other people other than your clients would be interested would be, very small in number. So it was only people who were interested in photography and therefore your photographs. So then the other avenues were having an exhibition. There weren't that many galleries. And then to mount an exhibition cost a lot of money because you have to make fancy prints, you have to make, frame them, or hire the gallery, etc. Or the other medium would be if you're a journalist or an advertising photographer that your work was used in magazines, either as editorial, part of editorial or a part of an advertising campaign. So that was one way that it would be shared with the world, or it was in the form of a book. So the reason I'm laboring over explaining all these that each of these were still limited avenues
Yeah. Yeah.
and limited to an extent where you knew exactly where they were going or largely
Yeah.
where they were going.
Yeah.
You would know who would come to the gallery. You would
Yeah.
know who could afford to buy an expensive photography book. You would know the kind of person who would be buying an India Today or a Dharam Yog, you know. Whereas today, like you rightly said, along with digital came the internet. So the ease with which you can take a photograph is the fruit of the digital technology,
Yeah.
where you don't really need to even engage with understanding what you're doing in terms of the technology, because the technology takes care of all that. And the instant gratification of seeing the picture yourself and
Yeah.
sharing it in the next instant online. So each of the other things was telling about film, in a way, I had to convince someone to do a show of mine in a gallery. Today, I can have a virtual photography show the minute I put my pictures on Instagram. It's a show because potentially that picture is available for anyone in the world to see who's signed into Instagram.
Yeah.
So that's a huge difference. So what that has done is it's in a way degraded the value of that exposure because exposure today potentially is available to you not in a few hundreds or a few dozens, is potentially available to you in millions.
Yeah, so you've just opened so many important threads. I'll try to reel them in one by one because all of them are very important right now.
Mhm,
And I've been having some thoughts of my own also during when you were speaking. So
mhm,
one thing was that there was a lot of effort from the photographer, right?
mhm.
But there was effort from the viewer also. If I am coming to
Yeah.
your gallery to see the exhibition, there
Mhm.
is an effort that I have put into it.
Yeah.
So I would expect to take something out of it.
Mhm.
If I'm buying that book, I will stop, I will sit, and I will actually try to understand what the artist is trying to say,
Right.
or what he or she would have intentionally or unintentionally captured.
Right.
So, in one space, the efforts have reduced to almost nothing because if you just want to share it at the end of the day, you can in WhatsApp you don't even need to take a photo first. It already has a camera button in it.
Yeah.
Same with Instagram.
Yeah.
Uh, and the viewer also, their effort has also almost gone because there is absolutely no kami of
Mhm.
images that they can see.
True. True.
uh, when you said that the visual is also a language, I'm
Mhm.
wondering whether the visual language, I don't want to say power,
Mhm.
but in the case of the visual language, do you think that it has to be something that catches the viewer's attention? At least for a second or 2 seconds, whereas in earlier you could take your time because the viewer would try to find what he was saying if they initially did not get it.
Okay. So I might now end up expanding this even more. So
Okay.
watch out.
Yeah.
Uh, with film, because there was so much deliberateness in the creation of the image, then the selection of how to share it, and inherent in that was who you're going to be sharing with or hope to be sharing with, right? So that was a pretty closed box. A lot of people do also call that a very elitist box.
Okay.
And the reason it was probably so is because photography was an expensive medium to work with. So either you were rich or you were a professional. The ordinary layperson could only use film to shoot the child's, birthday party and shoot 5 frames of that maybe, or a particular holiday which is taken once a year and you do family pictures, etc. But using photography for literally minute by minute expression of what's going on with my life was impossible for most people. All right.
Yeah.
So that's one huge shift which has happened. And which is why I say that, the visual today's language is because the ease with which you can use it and the inexpensiveness of the use allows me, like for instance, I learned how to speak when I was a child. Now, when I'm using these words, I don't have to pay anyone. There's no royalty. There's no technology I need to use. All right. I can use 5 words or I can use 50 to say the same thing. It's not costing me time or effort or money. Okay. Except where it differs from anyone else using the same words and me is my articulateness and also my creativity. Right. That has not changed. Similarly, for photography, for the person who was creating great images and using the visual to say something pointedly, creatively, provocatively, or whichever way they were, still remains the same. Except today, because it's not costing, like words are not costing anything, taking a picture is not costing anything, too many people are being able to use it. So, which is contributed to the deluge and the drowning of the meaningful images,
Correct.
which probably that multitude who's used contributing to the deluge were anyway not interested in looking at that meaningful image. So I don't, if I am into the business of meaningful images, actually don't need to worry about it being drowned as long as the audience which I want is still out there and I can engage with them. And I can.
That's very, very, fantastically said. And so there is this saying, right, that if nobody saw it happen, did it actually happen?
I
So,
love that phrase.
yeah. So unless your creativity of language or your articulation of language is actually validated by someone by hearing it,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what you speak, right? Now you're saying that until and unless you have
No,
your
it does
audience.
matter what you speak, except it doesn't impact what you speak. I mean, there's a difference there.
Uh, okay,
It
okay.
matters to me. You know,
Yeah, yeah, fine, fine.
it's part of the communication cycle is the person who creates that message as much as the person who receives the message.
But wouldn't the feedback loop also, for example, you said something beautiful, but you made a mistake in that, and there is nobody to, I'm not talking about validation, but now there is nobody to point it out also. So that is also a recursive process, I would think. That, of course, it matters to the individual themselves, but that process of validation also makes you understand of what might be lacking or what might have been done correctly.
I
So,
absolutely agree with that 100%. And my advertising background kicks in with that, for instance, is that no point creating a great ad unless someone is inspired by my message and goes out and buys or whatever. So I am fully in tune with that, and I'm fully in agreement with that. The only distinction I'm trying to make is that my process of creation of a message or a photograph or a novel or a piece of dance is not necessarily and should not be colored by who's going to see it. I would
exactly.
still do that process in its entirety for myself. Because otherwise, if I'm going to keep worrying about will I have an audience, will I have a buyer, will someone might take my print, will anyone, like what I put onto Instagram, then I am in a way letting that influence my creative process
True, true,
and what I want to express. Do I
true.
want to do that? Maybe I do in some cases, but there are other cases where I would rather keep it to the purity of my own thought.
So,
So I
yeah.
agree the communication cycle is complete only once someone creates a message, someone receives a message, and someone responds to the message. That response is as important as having received the message. But each of these individual, elements of the cycle do exist in their entirety. That's the only point I'm trying to make.
Even furthering that point itself, I did not want this to be about photography, the whole conversation, but I'm very happy because I'm also able to articulate my own thoughts about it, and I'm able to, as we said, verify
And if I
or,
may interrupt for
yeah.
just a second, I'm not talking about photography.
Okay, okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Language, we
we
can
could
say.
be talking about dance.
Yeah, yeah.
My wife is a
Uh,
Kathak dancer. She does riyaz 3 hours a day.
okay.
Whether she has a show coming up or not, she'll do it because she enjoys it and she thinks she owes it to herself and to her craft.
So again, I also agree exactly with all of that you have said. Would you, if I try to force you to reflect on your own experience and how your own work ethic and your own dedication towards art, uh, would you start observing some sort of bias in that? Now I'll try to expand on it. Okay, I have a habit of using very crude words, and then
No, it's
the,
good. I'm a
yeah,
Punjabi, so I don't. I prefer those.
the conversation goes in some other direction that I normally intend to, but I hope I can justify what I'm trying to say here. Right now, the social media handle that I use, Instagram, I have completely filled it. I've changed its name. It is not even my name. It is the podcast ka name. I just update the podcast ke updates. But before that, it was a photography handle. I also used to love, I still do, shooting photographs. But one thing I started observing was that the photographs that got good reception and the photographs that didn't get good reception, my habit of shooting inadvertently started shifting towards what was being received well. Okay, and now,
Absolutely. Yeah.
secondly, on the other hand, this is all in the let's say in the power of the individual who's doing it. Okay, but on the other hand, the platform that you're using, Instagram or any sort of social media, their core is to promote engagement as
Hmm.
long as the viewer can engage with it.
Sure.
So, so any person who updates, 100 Insta stories in a day,
Hmm.
or any sort of language that, as I said, gets abruptly catches the eye. It could be nudity, it could be
Hmm.
something radically polarizing. Those
Hmm.
things, just because of the habit of the viewers on statistically, people engage with that more. So
Hmm.
Instagram and social media promotes that.
Hmm.
So what ends up happening is, as an individual who's learning any sort of language, and
Hmm.
by language we are referring to any sort of art form,
Hmm.
we start seeing that, okay, my this work did not get that much validation or any sort of reception or response or engagement, but
Hmm.
that the other one, where I actually put a photo of my own girlfriend,
Hmm.
that sort of got a little more. So let me try more with that.
Hmm.
Now you have the freedom, power, and resilience to
Hmm.
have grown up in a, or practiced your art form in a time where it was not pushing you in
Hmm.
certain directions.
Hmm.
Those directions might be there for their own reasons, some other directions that the time might push you towards.
Hmm.
But this time, a person who's trying to find their art, would they end up having the resilience that you have right now, to be true to their art form? Sorry for such a long question, but
Okay.
thank you for
So
holding
actually,
it
what
on.
you've done is, in a more, I would say, contemporary way, you explain what I was just talking about earlier. Uh, and now let me try and decode it for you.
Okay.
You're confusing Instagram with photography.
Okay. Yeah. Fine.
Instagram is a place, is a मेला, और उस मेले में हम अलग अलग चीजें लेके जाते हैं दिखाने के लिए कि मैंने ये बनाया, तूने ये बनाया, अच्छा तूने ये बना दिया, अच्छा तू ये कर सकता है, you know,
Yeah.
uh, which can be great photographs or it can be just experiences or moments or memories. Okay.
Yeah.
Whereas photography, and which is why I repeated myself at least twice, if not more, that the communication cycle has three parts to it. And the first part is the creative process, which is a lonely, individualistic, selfish, personal part, where I create only because I want to, without keeping in mind what my audience will be, what they will expect of me, and what they will want of me. But once I put whatever I've created to the best of my ability or my inspiration or my choice, whatever it is, out in the public, then I am of the belief that it doesn't belong to me anymore, at least not alone.
Okay.
That work also belongs as much to the beholder to interpret or experience or encounter in ways which they are coming to it with their own set of biases, experiences, influences, and what have you. All right. So that can coincide with what I put into my piece of work entirely, partly, or not at all. All right. And
Yeah.
then the response of that person to whatever they have decoded or whatever I have created and put out in the public will come back to me either in the form of a comment, since we're still talking about Instagram, or a like or whatever, which can be extremely inadequate if the person is not understood. And it doesn't mean that the work was bad. It is just that the person doesn't know where you were coming from, right? So there you need to have enough confidence in yourself, and I don't mean confidence in terms of arrogance, but confidence in knowing what you are doing and what you want to do, irrespective of the quality, but at least the content. To not get discouraged कि यार इसको तो समझ ही नहीं आई. It's for instance, if I was to do a photograph of something in Banaras, which only people who've been there can understand, and especially if it has any kind of cultural overtone. And a friend of mine who happens to be from Finland sees it on Instagram and has no context, and therefore has no response at best, or says, "Oh my God, all I can see is dirt in the gully of our embassy." Or whereas actually what those are flowers which had been put onto a deity, which I understand, but he doesn't. So there are a lot of such things which there's much layering which goes into communication, which is why I think it's not just straightforward formula here,
Yeah.
and where both the process, the means, and the means in this case, the process is my thinking and my feeling, the means is photography, and the arena is Instagram, are separate from each other. So one has to have the maturity to understand that, to be able to actually be able to continue to work with it and not be in any way disheartened or discouraged or influenced. Which is not to say that I don't like likes. I love likes, yeah. Because to me it means that the person actually noticed something I've done, right? But does that mean that I will only shoot those kind of photographs? Maybe over a period of time it does tend to influence what I'll post in Instagram. But will it influence what I shoot and how I shoot? I don't think so, because then I have to be very strong in my understanding of my medium and my engagement with my subject. And I'm taking that for granted. For an artist, I would take that for granted. It's like you're the IIT and you're a scientist. I mean, you take it for granted that you are in there for the pure science and not just the application of that becoming an iPod.
I would agree that I did make the mistake of confusing the art form or photography in this case with Instagram. That is true. However, I'm still confused regarding we you definitely, and even me to some extent, still treat Instagram as an exhibition platform where
So it is. It
it
absolutely
is
is.
it
I'm
is
not in
correct,
a way
yeah.
denying that.
Yes.
Except
But
that I will expand that word slightly. It's not an exhibition platform. It's an exhibitionist platform.
yes, correct. Uh, but I have seen a lot, and I'm sure it can be supported by data that youngsters who are now coming up this world, they are hyper socialized because of apps like these. So that is why I made photography and Instagram synonymous, because I don't think there is any other avenue left which can and we can of course argue about that, but all my friends who are even working in Mumbai right now, they shoot
Mhm.
celebrities. Even they said that none of the clients, none of my friends have the time to go to my website to even check out a project that I might have done.
Of course, yeah, yeah. That's
So
very unfortunate, but that's a fact.
that's a fact, right? And I'm just trying to understand the state of, will we? Okay, so I'll just move on to my next question, because that
But
is
before
very
you move on
again,
to your next question, let me
yeah.
just say once again that
Okay.
photography as an art form or as a craft is different from exhibiting visuals on Instagram. Okay, because there is social factor there, especially the part which you were talking about in the end, but how people are are using Instagram to talk about the moods and to share whatever they're going through. Uh, it happens to be said in a visual, and I'm very constantly, if you see, keep using the word visual as opposed to photograph. Okay, as much as, and now let me give you another analogy here before we move on. All of us earlier used the analogy of words and spoken word. Now let me talk to the written word. Almost everyone who's on Instagram is also can write,
Yeah.
has a keyboard or a pen or whatever it is that they use to write,
True.
but none of them
True.
claim to be writers. No?
True.
Whereas anyone who happens to have a camera, which happens to be in every bloody phone today, whether they're claiming to be photographers or not, but by being seen as photographers, why? So that is a distinction I'm able to make because I am a photographer. All right. And I therefore don't call everyone else a photographer just because they happen to have I call them camera owners.
But doesn't it have tangible effects on reality as well? I would, as a business owner, if a photographer has, let's say, 50,000 followers.
But as a photographer, I can't take responsibility for all that. Now, that's a social thing which is happening.
Of course, yeah, yeah, yes, yes.
It's got nothing to do with the craft. There's a societal change which has happened because of the ease with which people are able to put that sense out, which is more to do with Instagram rather than the fact about photography.
True.
Instagram promotes the use of visuals to depict what I'm feeling. For the moment, let's take that as the given. That is not necessarily a photograph in my sense, in my way of thinking. It's a visual tool. Taking a picture of that hamburger which I'm eating in Nirula's and saying, wow, I'm loving it, is not photography. It's sharing of a moment. And where I'm using the visual language very fluently. So in my head, there's a very clear distinction between being an artist photographer and being a person who is fluent in the visual language and speaks with it. And which is what, platforms like, especially like Instagram, not so much Facebook, but Instagram definitely is entirely a visual platform.
Uh, do you not feel it is influencing the world of art, of photography?
No, it's not.
It's not.
It
Okay.
can, but for the people who take the photography seriously, use this as a platform to communicate with the larger world or the people they want to communicate with, but are not getting influenced by the number of people who respond to those photographs, because they also, I would imagine, like me, have
Yes.
another ecosystem in which they're sharing that work, which is
Yes.
more
Yes.
critical. Because if you're doing only in Instagram, then I'm sorry, you're not a photographer, you're a visual, a communicator. And in my head, there's a very, very distinct difference between the two.
So, in that manner, also, as you said, right, you have a certain avenue where it is much better. The work is scrutinized as the art that itself is, and
I don't call
you
it
have.
art, I'm calling it communication. There's a difference.
Uh, I'm talking about photography itself.
Okay.
I'm not talking about Instagram right now. I'm
All
talking
right.
about
Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
a
Okay.
work, yeah, an art piece that you might have created, photography that you might have created. You have a circle who will sit around, or once you share them, you get an actual response regarding the effort that you might have put in. Uh, I think I've dragged this topic for too long. But okay, fine. But I have another example if you want to hear
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Sure. Sure. Sure.
Okay, so there was this person who taught us photography in NID. Okay, he came as an external and he took a 2 week workshop, and we had massive respect for him. Right. Then a few days back, I called him for inviting him as a podcast guest itself. Right, and he tells me that Chaitanya, बहुत problem हो रहा है यार. मतलब I'm trying to search for work, I'm not getting any, because the difference of payment between me and a person that I have taught right now is not more than 1,000 rupees, and it is getting extremely troublesome to focus on my art. And I'm not just making these words up. I'm honest to God, because
No. No. I know. I keep hearing that myself.
yeah. So he was like, so that is what I was actually concerned about. That is the oppression of social media, and people uh, who have a sort of a stronghold there are getting more tangible work of the real world, and then that work reflects whether you're a published photographer or not, uh, and then that converts the world of photography itself. So that is the things that I'm
Okay.
thinking about.
So,
Yeah.
the downfall of photography, and I'm again using that word very carefully. The downfall of photography started with the digitalization of photography.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
and the fault doesn't lie in digital, it lies in the ease with
Yeah.
which
Yeah. Yeah.
photography can be done.
True.
Okay. Which is why I was laboring the point over the discipline and the PCBM which you had to have with film photography. Because people didn't stray into that. You had to
Yes.
be committed to it,
Yes.
both in terms of you know sense of creativity, and equally, if not more importantly, in terms of being able to financially support that habit. It was probably more expensive than if you got hooked onto cocaine or something. Whereas with digital, the entire rigor of creating that image is actually evaporated. You can go through the rest of your life with a digital camera, all right, without really knowing or having to bother about how it works. And your camera's software and the software which is available to you on your phone or in your laptop will help you make 99% of the time competent photographs as opposed to creative photographs. Now, what has happened is, because there's a multitude and deluge of images being created with great ease, that the person who's a buyer and supposedly a critical eye of
A
photography
validator, basically, of.
has got diluted. उसको तो लगता है कि बॉस, मैं क्यों उसको 50,000 रुपए दूं जब मेरा ये तो काम 5,000 में हो रहा है. And what it makes it worse is the use of that photograph has been reduced to, earlier it was it will come as a double spread in the India Today magazine once every month.
Yeah.
Today, the client also just wants a photograph which will be knows will be seen for 2 seconds on Instagram.
True.
So they're saying, why do I need that kind of skill and that kind of inputs and those kind of infrastructure
Mm.
to be able to create that photograph?
Yeah.
Let me do it too cheaply.
Yeah.
I'll give you a personal example. This is something which I realized about 10 or 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'd gone for a meeting with one agency, art director, and the client servicing people to someone who was starting a new restaurant.
Mm.
Okay.
Mm.
And while we were sitting and discussing there, this person who owned that restaurant told the client servicing person, अरे यार, my son has a very, I just bought him a new DSLR और वो यहाँ पे है नहीं, वो आजकल दुबई में है,
Mm.
नहीं तो मैं उससे फोटो खिंचवा लेता. So does that degrade photography as a commercial proposition? Enormously.
Mm. Mm.
But as an art form, no, it doesn't. Because it still does not mean that everyone is able to create that great photograph. It's just that the expectations from photography have
Changed.
fallen abysmally. So again, I mean, I can very clearly see this in my mind, and the fact that it has impacted photography very badly
Mm.
is a reality.
Mm.
But which still does not mean that millions of people are shooting great photographs. It's just that mediocre photographs are also accepted because the expectation of use of that photograph is very minimal.
Mm.
A brand's entire personality does not depend on it anymore. Whereas that one photograph in an advertising campaign meant it was a brand's face.
Mm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
today it's required for that 2 second on Instagram for a person to hopefully halt and like and then move on.
So one shift was the technological shift, right? Where it went from the PCMB that as you very I'll be using this from
Yeah,
now on. Okay. so,
please do.
yeah.
That's again a borrowed term, and I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah. So the
And
P.
brilliant ideas are the ones which travel.
Yes. Okay. That's again beautiful. So the one shift was where it changed from PCMB to, let's say, only E, that is electronic, and the second shift was the superhighway of information in social media.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So, photography was hit with a double whammy
yeah.
within a decade.
Yeah. Yeah.
As much as, and the only other art form which has been as impacted is music.
Yeah.
Because music also earlier required a lot of riyaz, a lot of commitment to be able to master that one instrument or your voice box.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether it's that drums or whether it's that guitar, which you spend years trying to master,
Mm-hmm.
it's all there in one. I don't even know what the hell those things are called, those keyboard or whatever the damn thing is.
Yeah.
And if you see the quality of music, therefore, which is produced, and the fact that no one needs to pay for it anymore, technology has driven music to mediocrity as it's driven photography to mediocrity.
At least music is not vulnerable to sexuality, or I don't know what would have happened. Uh, because something about the sexual nature of the visual really attacks the primal being, of the viewer. Because right now, if I'm viewing a photograph, I'm not viewing it on a wall somewhere. So in my own
Yeah.
privacy, I can actually spend a lot more time on a photo of, let's say, a girl who's scantily clad, and I'm talking about the masses here. I'm not talking about the individual.
Yeah.
So at least music cannot use that as something to move forward. But I must say that there are some incredible music artists who are completely electronic. But I get your point. What you're saying.
No, as much as like I'm saying, they're incredible photographers who use digital cameras.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. True.
I'm not for a moment saying that only people who are still working with film are incredible photographers.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. Uh,
The point I'm making, and please let me just make that very clearly now, is it's the content and the thought and the idea and the concept of the creator which is important, and then the mastery of the craft.
yeah.
But first is what my heart and my mind is doing, na? Which is true as much for a musician as it's for a photographer.
Yeah.
And that is where the difference lies. And if I may, and this is again something which I've been saying and which is seen as very politically incorrect, any art form needs to be elitist. The day an art form becomes democratic is that it's fucked.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because any art form, and I don't know if you can use that term. You can, erase it if you want. But I couldn't find anything more eloquent to,
It's my
say
own
what I'm
podcast.
saying.
That is why I'm not associated with anyone. I don't have to listen to anyone of what I can or cannot put here.
Is any art form
Yeah.
for its practitioners needs heroes. Okay, you need people to look up to. You need people who you inspire to be like. You need to look at people's work, which you say, if not do that work, but be like that,
Yeah.
which pushes you.
Yeah.
But the minute you say that it's a democratic art form, which means anyone can do it, that's the end of it. And I've had this discussion and argument with a lot of my photographer friends who say, that photographers today are democratic art form, so it's a great. I think that's what killed it.
That's just so beautifully put. I'm so thankful that you actually said it out loud, because you were when the first time you were talking about PCMB, right? Then
Yeah.
you talked about how it became digital. I was going to interrupt you, and I was going to ask you whether it is a good thing for photography itself that everyone can access it. And I think
No, it's not.
yeah, you've answered it very well. Uh, on the same line, I also asked this to a lot of people, almost all the guests that I have, because they are from a certain profession or not. I was talking to Krishnendu, who's a forest conservation activist, and we were talking about how a person should be aware of the problems going on in the forest, and they should be sensitive to those topics. And then I asked him that, and you have already iterated this point initially, that there is a certain privilege required to be from that art form to even appreciate it. Uh, if I had, मेरी बहन की शादी होती and I did not have a job, I wouldn't have the time to appreciate a photograph, stop and appreciate. So, I understand that there are certain pioneers to over whom this art form can be interested upon. But then again, the democratic aspect of it is removed. Uh, would you say that certain privilege is required, to practice an art form? Because of course, time is required, and time itself is a certain privilege that only a few people have. I'm not asking whether it is good or bad. Okay, everything is gray here. But what are your thoughts on that?
I will keep going back to the point, and I'll use the analogy of writing, music, and photography. Okay, because these are three things today which anyone can do. But can anyone do it well enough to impress anyone else is the point.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. And that is where the difference lies. Can I, all of us had know the words. Can I string them together in a sentence and thereafter into a paragraph and thereafter into a short story or a novel in a way that I can hold someone's attention and want to stay with that story? Or am I able to sing in a way that I get a person to stick with me for 3.5 minutes till the song ends? As much as will a person look at my photograph, whether it's for those 2 seconds or 5 seconds, or go through the various layers I supposedly put into that photograph or meaning, uh, is the point.
Uh-huh.
Because each of these art forms are actually crafts and today are easily available to anyone. Okay, speaking and writing is something which simple education has given us for generations. Photography digital has allowed for everyone to use. But the ability to be able to see the difference between the creative use of any of these media or these crafts as opposed to the general use or the democratic use is very clear in the minds of people who are creators as opposed to users.
Actually, why
That's
I asked about privilege and as opposed to the other things that we have been talking right now about was because, as you were saying, that if you can be that good to master the craft or master the art, or master in the sense at least spend some time to even start practicing, or even to have a vision that okay, I will,
yeah.
if I'm playing the flute, I will give some time to it to better it. And just giving time for practice itself is a privilege that not a lot of
Is
people
it
have. Uh, I often tell people that I went to NIT. It was not because I'm talented. It is because I had the resources in money as well as time to actually care about something like photography. That is not important at all in terms of survival. I came to IIT not because I'm only talented or not because I'm talented, but probably because I had the time to prepare for it that not a lot of people have. So that is why I was asking that.
No, that point about privilege to from that point of view, I can understand. The privilege, of course, also then extends all the way back to the what kind of school you were sent to, or what your upbringing was. All those things come into play. Yeah? So it's not even just exclusively about a particular art form or a craft. It's about the entire package of what the person is about. I mean, as opposed to someone who was born in India and born in Japan. Yeah, so extend it all the way backwards. No?
Dinesh, I had 13 questions written here. We've done two out of them. So, what I'll do is I'll just skip all the photography questions now because I really wanted to talk to you something other than photography. But I'm happy on the route that we took to get till here. So what do you find so beautiful about the kitchen? One recurring motif that I've seen on Instagram as well as in your talks, that you're very appreciative of all the things going on in the kitchen.
It comes from two things, really, and you'll be surprised with the part of my answer now.
Okay.
Uh, Food is something which, being a good Punjabi, I've always loved. Okay, good food is something which is, inherent in our culture, which, whether it's Punjabi or Indian, whatever it is, or just being human is one part. Uh, so it's one is the eating of food and the taste and everything. The other is being a visual person. For me, the color and the texture and the tonalities of food items, both in their raw form and in their cooked form and their presentation, is something which is a huge turn on.
Okay.
Right? So that's my visual interpretation of my visual interaction with something which I'm inherently in love with, right? Which is the eating of the food. And in the last 30 years of being a professional photographer, food photography, probably for partly because of this reason and partly because of the way my business has gone, has been a very large part of my uh, professional career. So, in effect, I've had a chance to work with some great food stylists and great chefs, from great restaurants, and they've very interesting preparations, great presentations. Whether it was the ambience, whether it's the way the food was structured and displayed, all that. So it's that has really, in a way, refined my sense of food. Okay, so that's one part of it. Then what you are referring to, which is in recent times, I've been putting out photographs just shoot with my phone uh, of what I call small tales from a kitchen table, which I do on Instagram, and which actually is my appreciation of the lady who works in my house. Her name is Jaya.
Okay.
She cooks for us. But the way she cuts the vegetables and places them on that one chopping board, and each of those photographs, the canvas is always that same chopping board.
Wow.
It's done so graphically and so neatly and so vividly in different days that it's my engagement with that as a visual person.
Wow.
I'm not cutting those vegetables. I'm not setting them up. They are actually candid photographs. It's the one which catches my eye the day I've gone into the kitchen and say, Jaya, अरे वाह, एक मिनट रुक जा, मेरे को इसकी photo लेनी है. But she does. I know the fact that she finds it really interesting and intriguing and I am the kind, I photograph my children, I photograph my dogs, I photograph the light falling on the staircase and the vegetables in the kitchen. Everyone in my family knows that I'm a obsessive photographer. So they don't even, I think, anymore notice कि ये, पागल है क्या इस चीज की photo खींच रहा है, whatever it is. But having said that, the interesting thing which has happened is that there's a friend of mine, Sudeep Sen. He's a very good and very well-known poet.
Okay.
He saw these photographs on Instagram because he follows me and stuff. He started writing poems based on the feeling that particular photograph evoked in him. And he's already done about 20, 25 such poems or pieces or little short, snippets. And we are actually seriously talking about doing a book.
Wonderful. That seems like such
And
a.
I told him that we will do a book, but there are three creators of this book. There's Sudeep Sen, the poet. There's Dinesh Khanna, the photographer. But most importantly, there's Jaya, the person who is making these canvases literally. So if there is a book, it will have all three of our names explaining exactly what each one's role is.
Please consider a pre-order from my side. whenever that happens.
It's in the process.
Yeah, you know, for all the photography that you might have done in your life, when I
Mm.
when anybody utters the name Dinesh Khanna, the visual that I have in my mind is of a chopping board with cut up vegetables. I'm honest to God.
I can understand that, but also that could possibly be because you followed me in a time when I was obsessively following the chopping board.
That is, I think that is the big
Because I tell you
reason.
why,
Yeah.
because I tend to do this obsessively. If you were following me about 3, 4 years ago on Facebook, and which happens even till today, I was obsessively shooting kursis wherever I went,
Ah, okay, okay.
right? And I actually have done a series called Kissa Kursi Ka.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Uh, and till today, people who followed me with that, at least once or twice a week, people will send me a photograph of some broken down, decrepit chair they've come across and say, I saw this chair and it reminded me of you. It's like the entire world chairs and they had, belonged to me. So, that is the difference between photography and engaging with your subject, which is more important than photo लेके तुमने Instagram पे डाल दी. Is there's a thought, there's a feeling which is getting communicated, and which is what gives it the power.
Yeah.
So it's really the idea and the concept which is far more important than the act of having, you know, created a photograph.
I would agree with that actually. Um, if it's okay with you, I would like to change the topic a little regarding something I am more interested about.
Mhm.
And in our previous conversation on the phone, I told you, I just mentioned it briefly that
Mhm.
the idea of fatherhood, and
Mhm.
especially again, a lot of the knowledge that I have about you comes from your Instagram account, right? And
Mhm.
you have been so descriptive about how proud you are to be a father of two daughters. And
Mhm.
me, as a person who got married 2 3 years back, I know there'll be a certain time where I'll have to start thinking of a family.
Mhm.
Honestly, I have been very skeptical and somewhat hoped that whenever that happens, I don't end up getting a daughter. Now, this is not a very recent thought that I've had. It was when I was in 11th or 12th, and India is a country that is somewhat unsafe for women, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm. Mhm.
there is no point beating around it. And there is this cultural thing also that everybody would be happier if you have a boy. I'm talking about the
Mhm.
Samaj and not
Mhm.
maybe not immediate relatives.
Sure.
But I used to feel so. I don't know what that feeling was when I saw your photos and you talking about your daughters, and it just felt so interesting. And interesting is a very shallow word that I'm using because I don't have any other way to describe it. Could you tell me a little about that? And also, did you have any preconceived notion that were changed after having two daughters grow up in front of you?
Okay. I don't know if I'll be able to explain this, but let me try. So we are three siblings. I have two sisters, one elder to me, one younger to me, and I'm the only son. So, and I have two daughters. Right. So, in effect, my life has been populated by women, and that is a very important point because what happens is, and especially in countries like India and cultures like ours, genders tend to congregate as genders.
Okay.
Right. Fortunately, I was brought up in a household where there was no differentiation between me and my sister. So a lot of it has to do with my parents having, brought that sensibility or sensitivity into me. Otherwise, there is unfortunately a tendency that the son is one is wanted, two is then pampered. More than the
Yeah, yeah.
daughters who might have been unwanted, but if they came along, then but weren't, pampered to the same extent. So that's something which I'm very acutely aware of, and I know it happens a lot in my country, and it's something which deeply troubles me, if does not make me feel ashamed of the fact that this is the way it is. Which is why I want to make sure that I don't be like that.
Okay, okay.
For instance, one of the things I promised myself, even before my daughters were born or after they were born, is that I will never tell them when asked if they can do something or go somewhere that no, you can't because you're a girl.
Okay.
All right.
Wow.
And that has been, if there's one phrase or the absence of one phrase which has dictated how I've interacted or brought up my daughters, it's that. And I'll be the first one to admit that it's not that I've trained myself to a point where that phrase does not come to my mind. It still does. For all the reasons which you gave just now about that India can be unsafe for women and they might be unwanted, etc., or it's just my protectiveness. But I make sure that I don't let them cross my lips because I don't see any reason why anyone's gender, or for that matter, age, should be a determinant about what they can do or what they can't do. One point. Secondly, as a parent, I'm very clear, and thankfully, maybe I read Khalil Gibran's poem about parents, many, many years ago before I became a parent, where he very clearly says that your children are not yours. They pass through you. They are of the next
Wow.
age,
Okay.
right? And I'm sorry, I'm not, quoting the words properly. I would want to actually, but that's the essence of it. So therefore, and like I probably in the beginning of this conversation did say that I hate the word allow because allow is transactional. Allow means one person has the power and the other has to take permission. Okay, I haven't allowed Myra to become a diver. Myra decided to be a diver. I haven't allowed Myra to live in Mysore. It's her choice. It's her life, right? I didn't allow Mahi to take up history and international relations as a subject of her choice. It's her choice, it's her life. I can live my life. I have no right whatsoever, and I'm very clear about that, to live anyone else's life or dictate it. And that is whether it's my children, whether it's my spouse, whether it's my siblings, whether it's my friends. It's not a very easy way to live. You have to constantly remind yourself that this is the way you want to live. Is respect others for the individual which you are yourself too.
The inspiring part of this is that the strictness or the restrictions that you're bringing is first to yourself. You're
It has
bringing
to
it.
be entirely that's where it has to stem from.
Yeah, yeah.
Because if it's any other way, then as far as I'm concerned, I'm treading on someone else's domain or their toes or their area of their life, and I have no right.
So, in some cases, and I'm sure there are a lot of places where the experience of a parent or experience of a husband might be beneficial to the children or to the spouse. So, how do you find that balance of how to communicate where you might think that the person opposite to you might end up in a situation they would not like to, but you can say that from your experience, but you don't want to impose anything. So, how do you find that balance?
Like in with any good question, the answer is inherent in your question itself. Is that I have experiences. I've gone through various things in life. Did I learn from them, including the negatives? I did. Why should I rob my children from that process of making their mistakes and dealing with their negatives? So that's one part of it. The other part is that yes, the experiences I have, I ought to share, and I do share, but I don't share them as instructions. I share them as experiences. I will not say मेरे साथ ये हुआ था तो therefore तू ये नहीं कर सकती. I can say ये मेरे साथ हुआ था अब तुम देख लो.
You keep that knowledge with you and then tread your own path.
It's very simple, actually. Yeah? It's not easy to live this way. Let me not, in any way trivialize it.
Yeah, I'm sure
It's
it is
very
not.
easy to decide these 4 or 5 rules for yourself and say that's the way I live it.
And especially when you have to tell, answer to someone, अरे तुम तुम्हारी बेटी को डाइविंग जाने दे रहे हो, तुम तुम्हारी बेटी को मैसूर जाने दे रहे हो. I don't know how heavily that weighs.
And my first reaction always is, "What do you mean allow? Who am I?" And then they look at me blankly and say, "What do you mean allow? What do you mean? Why are you asking that? Aren't you the parent?" I said, "Yeah, but I'm not the keeper. I'm not the jailer. I'm not the warden."
That's being very appreciative of what you just said. I'm not sure even I can promise to be like that because I also have my own. I'm sure I would be a restrictive father when I do, but
No, if you believe that, then you will be. But if you believe there's any sense in what I'm saying, because I think what I'm talking about are fairly universal truths. So that might not be the universal way of being, but they're universal truths. The truth is that each individual has a right to their own life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like for instance, if I was to think that I have a right to tell my daughters what they ought to do, but what if I die tonight? Then what are they supposed to do for the rest of their lives? Who do they turn to for instructions? They'll have to run their own lives, na?
Yeah. Yeah.
So why am I in any way crippling them by saying कि ना अब जब तक मैं यहाँ हूँ मैं चलाऊंगा?
True. Have you tried to convince other people to, sort of see from this perspective, or you're like, you live your life, I will handle my family how I want, and
I see a part of living this way, of thinking this way, and then living accordingly is that I am happy to share with anyone what I think.
okay, you don't want to impose
But
it on anyone.
no, you want to take anything from it, do. If you don't, and you want to trash it. It's your choice. Yeah, it's your land.
Any, as I asked before, any preconceived notions that you had that changed after having two daughters?
Very first one was that I have to tell them, that you can't do this because you're a girl. Like I said, even 25 years later, the thought still crosses my mind. Huh?
Yeah. No, but that was not a preconceived notion. That was something that you restricted yourself to, and from your own discipline you made sure that you don't go about doing that. But anything that took you by surprise.
Is the sense of how protective you do feel, irrespective of how you want to let go, and
Okay. Okay.
it's and not for a moment. I hope I'm not communicating that. Don't worry, but it's my worry. I don't need to communicate that to my daughters.
Yeah.
If at all, communicate to them the fact that I'm concerned. I think that comes from emotion rather than from proprietariness. Now, there's a difference. I don't want them to feel unloved, but it doesn't mean that my love has to be smothering.
I think your whole idea and ideology can be summed up in that one sentence that I do love my daughters, but my love does not need to be smothering in any case.
And it's not just for daughters, it's about any
Yeah,
relationship.
of
Yeah.
course, of
It can
course.
be a boss and subordinate.
Yeah.
You extend it's about a human relationship where the possibility of hierarchy and therefore ownership can come into play, which unfortunately can in any human relationship. Whether it's a husband wife, whether it's a parent child, whether it's whether it's siblings, it's if you let that come in, the potential is always there. Between government and citizens, I mean, you name it.
This next question, you can choose not to answer it because I don't know how comfortable you would be with that, and of course I can edit it out if you say so. But I wanted to ask whether you think about mortality. In your talk also, and even in this conversation also, you mentioned that there was this abrupt demise of your father,
Mhm.
and I don't know how that impacted you. It must have been a tough time for you as well. But do you somewhat replay those thoughts and think about your daughters? In some way, you've already answered it that you want to make your daughters, you want to see them fend for themselves, and
Mm.
you're already in the process of it. But other than that, do you think about mortality and those things?
I don't think about it obsessively, but the fact that mortality is a reality as much as my birth was is something which is very clear to me. If my birth is very clear to me, in spite of not having been, consciously there, at least in the sense, कि, हाँ, अरे मैं पैदा हो गया, अरे वाह वाह वाह,
Uh huh.
none of us did that. We didn't know. So similarly, you know, why do we keep pushing away the fact that we're going to die? No one's here forever. I've seen enough deaths of whether it's my parents, whether it's friends, whether it's all kinds of people. The 63 years I've lived, to know that it's a reality. It's something which still shocks us, when it happens, uh, and it will shock me too. But will I be able to deal with it? Of course, I will. It's and that probably is something which losing a parent at an early age, and I was I think 26 or something when my dad passed away, and also because he died in a very unnatural, a car accident. You don't expect, and he was all of 60 years old. I'm already 3 years older than he was when he passed away. Right? So that kind of abrupt ending of a life takes a long time to one to come to terms with. Which when I look back, I realize that I pushed it away in terms of everyday consciousness. But at the same time, it did prepare me for the fact that look, this happens, and also probably is has a role to play, significant or otherwise, in my feeling that each one of us needs to be able to run our own lives. And because over the years I've seen other friends, for instance, or cousins whose fathers stayed, I mean, they're in the 50s and 60s, and the fathers are still alive, and they talk about how they discussed this with their father, and and they asked him for their advice, and all that stuff, or doing business with them, etc. And I realized that, so I haven't had that privilege, or I haven't had that opportunity, or whatever you want to call it. So this, the thing of being a self-made person takes on another meaning for people like me, who lose a parent at an early age.
Understand.
Uh, One is being self-made because you strive to do something which you are interested in yourself. Another is being self-made also because circumstances ensure that you have to do so.
I was listening to this podcast a few days back, and it was a scientific approach, and they were describing how humans are not engineered biologically and socially to deal with uncertainty.
Mhm.
And I think that is how even religion comes into play, because people just want to put their faith into something that
Mhm.
just take care of it. We don't want to talk about it, we don't want to be comfortable with that idea. But the incident that happened with you, I think maybe would have uh, made you more uh,
I don't think there's maybe in that at all. I think it would definitely, because it is a life altering enough thing to happen for one, and at any age, but if it happens to you when you're 26 and just starting off your own life, it does make a difference. But just coming back to the use of the word uncertainty, I don't see there being any uncertainty in that.
exactly. No, but we call it uncertainty.
All
It
of
is.
us are guaranteed, will happen to us. Whether we become rich or famous, or ill or not,
Yeah, yeah.
you can't be certain of those. You can be certain that you'll fucking die.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
So
That is actually quite ironic that the thing that is most certain in our life, we tend to say, we tend to consider it the most uncertain, and we try to run away from it.
and the only reason I think for that is that that is that one certainty which we don't know what will happen post having attained that certainty.
And how it happens also.
हाँ, how कभी fear कि I hope I don't fall ill, I hope I don't get run over वगैरह होता है.
हाँ हाँ.
But the thing of, for instance, I will become famous and then I will do this. I'll become rich and I'll buy that car. Or if I become poor, I'll not be able to feed my family. There's always an if with that.
Yeah,
But with the certainty of death, there's no, and then I will, you don't know what the fuck.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And to my mind, that's the reason we don't deal with it.
yeah.
Because we don't know what to deal with.
And as for many religions, a lot of them also try to prepare you, or in sort of nudge you to mold your life in a sense that it would affect your afterlife. The
Hmm.
Greek concept, the whole Greek mythology is made in the sense that they considered this life as a vessel, and
Hmm.
the real life starts after death.
Hmm.
So I think it is just modes of to deal with this whole event.
Absolutely. But, is it imaginative? Is it creative? Was it reality? Is still up for grabs. No?
Yeah,
It's
that's.
like, for instance, in India, I think, especially amongst Hindus, and being a Hindu, I think I can speak about it. The fact that we've been fed this line कि इस जिंदगी के कर्म,
Ah, true, true.
इसके बाद की तो जिंदगी है,
Yeah,
या जो आपका इस जिंदगी में हाल है वो पिछले जिंदगी के कर्मों की वजह से है.
yeah, yeah.
It's a line which has been fed beautifully by our rulers and our religious leaders to the masses so that they don't get blamed for anything.
True.
I'm now stretching a point, but I think Indian government don't get blamed for anything because I blame myself first, my destiny. खाने को कम है यार, मेरी किस्मत है. घर नहीं है, मेरी किस्मत है. ये सड़क टूटी हुई है, ये तो ऐसे ही होता है, ये तो किस्मत है. और लीडर की कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है उसमें.
Yeah.
या वो बनारस में अगर मैं गया, कीप टॉकिंग अबाउट बनारस बिकॉज़ आई एम डूइंग अ प्रोजेक्ट इन बनारस. अगर वो पंडित से ने कहा कि आप ये पूजा करोगे तो आपको ये जो आप मांग रहे हो मिलेगा, बट आपको अगर वो नहीं मिलता तो आप नहीं जाओगे वापस बनारस, कहोगे साले तूने मेरे से पैसे लिए थे, मेरे साथ नहीं हुआ.
Yeah, and one very blatant example of what you're saying, where you don't blame yourself, when you say that India का overpopulation का problem, they just said Bhagwan की देन है, we can't do anything about it.
भगवान की देन है भाई, मैंने क्या किया.
Exactly. So, and you understand that because whenever you question something, your first question, from what I have assorted right now, is that you first question yourself whether did you have any role to play in that. Uh,
Isn't that the only thing actually? The only point of control, if at all, is with your own mind and your own heart. And I don't mean to make it sound easy. It's not that I have done it. I've attained nirvana and I've been able to do it. But I have at least attained the awareness of that.
yeah, yeah.
And that is something I think all of us ought to be aware of. That look, boss, जो आप कर रहे हो या आप कर सकते हो, सबसे बड़ा हाथ आपका है उसमें.
Yeah, it's the simplest of things that is the worst to explain, or to actually for a person to absorb, because अगर मेरी life में problems है, I'll be well off blaming it on some particular group rather than myself.
Yeah.
So I hope it changes, but let's see how the times turn out. Uh, one question regarding art I had, that I have been pondering over myself, and I've not had the chance to ask it to anyone, but I think you might be a good person to think about it. So I saw your photo, and why I'm asking you this question is because I saw that photo that you took of the Ames Square, where the labor is sleeping on in the lawn. So I started thinking that, uh, see, authorities, no matter what decision they take, right? No matter what decision, even if it is the best of decisions, and I
Sure.
have no political bias here, right? Whatever decision they take, there will be some particular person or some community or some individual who might be badly affected by it, or even the byproduct, the side effect of it might cause something bad. You make a flyover, you're going over some persons, some communities
Yeah.
jhopadies, you know. And artists live in a world where they are very connected to the grassroots. They're connected to the world, right? Most of them, they observe the society, they hold a mirror to the society, and they are always living with their surroundings. They're not insulated to it. So will it always be the case that artists and authorities, whether it be government or whether it be an institution or whether it be anything, will artists and authorities always be in conflict? It has been happening till now. Maybe not during the time when the kings and queens commissioned work. But what do you think of that? Because I've never seen artists, have a chain ki sleep. There is always something bothering them, and rightly so.
I think it's in the nature of the job, and I'm
Yeah.
using the word job. आपका जॉब क्या है? मैं आर्टिस्ट हूँ. आपका जॉब क्या? मैं गवर्नमेंट में हूँ. आपका जॉब क्या है? मैं बैंक क्लर्क हूँ. आपका जॉब क्या? मैं ड्राइवर हूँ. Uh, so in the nature of the job is exactly what you're saying. If I'm an artist, then the package comes with concern, and it's not necessarily. And I want to make that point very clear. Not concerned enough to necessarily give up my life for the good of others, but yes, be aware of what is missing in other people's lives and bring that point up at times. So that difference is there. And as far as political leadership is concerned, inherent in that is that I know the answer. I have seen the light. I'll show you the way. Uh, if you're able to understand that that is where that person is coming from and thinks that person is right, then where's the conflict? What we think is that we expect a political leader who says I have the answers and I'll show you the way
Uh-huh.
should also be able to say, but I am also very concerned about you. What? Tell me, what is your problem?
True, true.
It doesn't go together.
But in this case, I'm not very concerned about the efficiency or the efficacy or the administrative prowess of any sort of authority. I'm just asking about this relationship. Will it be ever the case where artists would be proud of any authority in that manner? I'm sure the artists in Scandinavian countries are also critiquing their own governments, and we're taking governments because it's a low-hanging fruit. You can take those examples very easily.
They are artists, whether they're writers or painters or whatever they might be,
Uh huh.
who, because of their voice, become a part of the ruling clique
Uh
in a particular time in any country or in any society.
huh.
Uh, where that sense of power then, takes away from the fact that they are artists of concern. So they still might be artists in the sense of having a great control of the craft which they are, involved with, but have the power of a politician or a leader. It's a, none of these things are boxes. All the
Yeah,
edges are
yeah.
permeable.
Yeah, these are all, yeah, edges of, seamless edges of, we don't know
Yeah,
where it
I mean,
converts
there's
to
always
what.
a core. The edges, are permeable. They go into the next and
Mm,
they mix with the next and they leak into the next. And
yeah,
I think problem is there where we start looking at everything as a very finite, definitive
yeah,
box,
yeah.
which is not so. An artist, for instance, who gets famous and makes a lot of money,
Mm,
uh, stops being so concerned. He's more concerned about the next million they'll get from their canvas rather than, and is quite likely to paint a canvas which shows the lachari of someone still, if that's been there, what they've been doing. बट वो ये तो नहीं है कि वो सड़क पे निकल पड़ेंगे झंडा उठा के कि भी अब जिसके बारे में मैंने पेंटिंग करी है इनकी जिंदगी बदलो, वो कोई करता है?
correct. I had sort of predicted that you would be a person who would take into account the nuances, a person who would say that things are permeable, and I'm happy that we have no black and white going on over here. And I love these sort of conversations, where both the speakers are receptive of the fact that, first of all, uncertainty, as we talked about, and
Hmm.
secondly, of not knowing where the edge ends and where something else starts.
How boring would I be if you could define everything about me यार, and expect कि ये ऐसा ही है बस,
I
which
feel
of
मैंने
course we do
पूछा.
all the time with people we encounter and meet, but that's again human, ना?
Yeah, yeah. So one thing I wanted to ask, and I want to ask this to every person who have had some experience in their life. So the youth of today feels that, even me included, we feel that there is a state of emergency in the country or in the world, that we need to change the world. But has it always been like that? Because from what I've read and what I've seen, every generation thinks that they are going to be the generation that makes the change, and they
Hmm.
sometimes they do end up making the change. But then it again, the equilibrium is reached, and then again there is some other problem that arises. So is this conflict eternal?
I think it's the human condition for sure. There's always this feeling that things can be better,
Uh huh.
and inherent in that is that things were better earlier.
Yes.
And which comes from the fact that human beings are conscious, are questioning, uh, you know, do wonder, do aspire, do complain. It's got to do with that entire. That's our package. That's what we are. So in that, it's bound to be so. Also, societies and cultures are cyclical. Currently, the cycle in India and in some countries of the world is where one particular ruling elite has lost its power and another one has discovered it and is using it in the in its more crudest form possible of expressing that power rather than expressing the responsibility which comes with that power. To my mind, that is something which you learn with time or not learn with time because then you get thrown over. If you do learn that in time, then you stay on longer. India definitely is going through that process, and I think India is finally meeting its own destiny in a way. And if you see the last few decades or the last few centuries, it was leading to where we are at the moment. I mean, there's no two ways about it. I mean, normally the way I argue with my friends is that what's happening today actually should have happened in the 50s or 60s, because by now the equilibrium between people who think that this is my country and I've not been allowed it would have been played out. It's playing out 70 years later. There's in that time there's a whole lot of resentment and bickering which is also accumulated, which is cancerous. That's what's showing up at the moment. Yeah.
Do you have you thought about it or observed, or do you think that conflict has actually increased? It could be mental conflict. It need not be physical violence. Do you think that the conflict in the country has actually increased, or has the technology enabled all sorts of conflict to reach to the viewer very easily, consequently making the viewer think that the things are atrocious right now. Because I remember my father telling me in my own hometown, I'm from a very small town in Madhya Pradesh called Mahu, near
Mhm.
Indore.
Wow.
He used to tell me that, and it is a cantonment. He used to tell me, and he was a press photographer that time. So
Mhm.
he keeps telling me stories about how there used to be incredible communal violence, and
Mhm.
every other month.
Right.
So what do you think about that? I have no answers right now because obviously I've not lived such a time scale, but I would like to know from your perspective.
I have a feeling that just because we're able to, or we have allowed a lot more voices uh, to come into our mind through obviously through technology or the means of communication which are available today, and we've opened ourselves to it and therefore succumbed to that cacophony, is what makes us feel that things are really crazy and falling apart. For instance, I very consciously took a decision that I will not watch TV news
Wow.
about a year and a half or more ago, and I've not switched on the television. And I promise you, I feel that the world is a bit calmer than it was when I was watching at least certain kind of news channels, right? And I can still see the perception of what's happening today, the difference between some of my friends who follow those religiously and the fact that I don't even know what the hell is happening on those. Uh, and my information, if at all, is coming more from a newspaper, which I read at my own pace and absorb with my own ability, which is critical. Uh, which television news, the way it's got constructed in India, is not doing. It's force feeding you. So that I think is the difference. So the reality of the perception that things are terrible, okay, and I'm using these words very carefully. The reality of the perception that things are terrible is real for anyone who opens themselves to that. As much as my reality and my perception that things are calmer and quieter is real for me. Because see, at the end of the day, you live within your own circle, na? Within your own home and your friends and your business or your profession. And if I don't let the news of what's happening now in Bihar and West Bengal, where the elections coming up, so therefore, what the TV channels are saying is happening between these parties who are warring over the votes, uh, it doesn't affect me that much then.
That is why I'm so concerned about the world of social media, because we have a separate avenues for receiving information, but right now, uh, and even me, I am able to distance myself from those platforms very easily, but even they are promoting a lot of voices. They're promoting some good voices also who are very rational and provide both the sides, but it has gotten very difficult for people to distance themselves from sources of rampant information, whether good or bad. So it just burdens the mind of my friends. But when I
There
walk, yeah.
is something which I have done, and I'm just sharing that as an experience, not as a something which I'm holding up as a flag. I used to, for instance, post a lot of political things which had to do with my political beliefs, what or what I thought was worthy of discussion. But I found that they half the time degenerated into tutu memes. So over the last 1 or 2 years, I have consciously stopped posting anything political. And my posts, if you follow me, you'll notice are almost entirely to do with photography or things related to. And therefore, social media does not control my political thinking, and therefore doesn't influence me and doesn't make me think, that so and so is right or so and so is wrong or so and so is good and so and so bad.
And another thing that you mentioned that I also found very important and something that I can relate to also is that when I close these things and walk out of my own house, talk to my own neighbors, talk to my own community, everything seems fine. That does not mean that everything is fine in the country, but if I can just take care of my immediate environment, I think that makes a lot of difference on a larger scale. If
Look, at the end of the day, every society is made of what?
Yeah,
Of
true.
individuals. Huh?
And
So it permeates downwards and it also then expands upwards. I mean, unless I become a hermit and say कि मैं तो पहाड़ में जाके वहां रहूंगा, I am going to be affected what's happening around me. Na?
yeah, yeah,
If not by political violence, then by inflation. If not by inflation, by something else.
yeah.
So you're not But how much and what affects you, there is at least some modicum of control which you can exercise there.
Yeah. And having some sort of a human interaction other than an interaction through a screen, there is just something about it that is reassuring on some level, that I feel.
Yeah.
Because once it started with the TV, right, concentrating families into their own homes, and now I have seen that it is very difficult for communities, they still do, but it is very rare to see children of my age, 25, 26 year old, playing cricket, hordes of them.
Yeah.
It is rare. It still happens, but all the interaction has taken replaced by digital interaction, and I don't know how that would affect on a longer term on the human mind. But that is an observation that
Like you said, I mean, these changes started happening from the time the phone first came in. So earlier you could not talk to that Masi who lived in New York, yeah,
yes,
and because of the phone you were able to at least once in a while, and but it was still too expensive to be able to do it more than once in 6 months.
yes,
Now with FaceTime you can talk anytime you want, but you can talk so easily that you don't actually talk for 6 months.
exactly, exactly.
So
That's the irony of it.
really, it's just that जितना करना है उतना ही करते हैं, वो एक कोई इक्विलिब्रियम बन जाता है अपने आप से.
Why? Uh, because of the technology having so many contacts, I feel I've ended up talking to even fewer people than I might have in earlier. So anyway, I think, as with the last question, the whole conversation has been very interesting to me, Dinesh. I
I'm very happy to have these kind of discussions, and especially if both people talk openly, frankly about what they think, and even if they think differently, not to be acrimonious about it. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's all there is to it.
Yeah. So I hope I can talk to you sometime again, and let's have a human interaction sometime. You know.
I will definitely make it a point.
ठीक है दिनेश, thank you, take care, and again thank you for being on the PS podcast.